I decided to be a good person. What a horrible mistake this was. I'm not one of these people who constantly seeks out inspiration online. I get irritated by all those posts because it's usually someone telling themselves what they want to hear. It's like self-encouragement, but publicized to everyone as if they care about everyone else. But I saw this NPR tweet, and for a second, I decided to be a good person. What a horrible mistake this was. What a huge waste of time. And now I'm going to tell you why it's a waste of time, and I'm going to make it useful for you just so you don't think it's a waste of time. NPR posted this tweet. Julia the Hurricane Hawkins became the first female track and field athlete in the 105 plus age bracket to clock a time in the 100-meter dash. So I'm like, oh my God. I am so inspired. And I clutched my heart and I'm like, oh my God, this woman is amazing. Not only did I click on the link and read the story, but I clicked on the video of her attending the event, getting out of the car, going to the track. And then afterwards, they asked her, Julia, what wisdom do you have to share with all of these people that are out there looking at you doing what you're doing at 105? She's like, keep running. Our expectation of wisdom from age is wildly misguided. You can live 1,000 lifetimes and never accumulate any wisdom worth having. I opened my heart to this 105-year-old woman. She must have something. She must have secrets, at least a diet tip, something. And give me like one of the Joe Rogan tips where you take a vitamin and you lift a kettlebell. She had nothing. She had less than nothing. She irritated me. She stole my time. This 105-year-old woman owes me 14 to 18 minutes. I'm glad she's doing it. I'm glad she's alive, but she is not inspiring anyone. Because a lot of times, age gets to us long before wisdom does. I think about this with my parents, lovely, lovely parents, wonderful people. However, not exactly adventure seekers or livers of life or accumulators of wisdom. Now, they think they have wisdom because they never stop giving unsolicited advice. But I think of someone like Freddie Mercury. That guy lived. He died at, 41 or early 40s. He partied, he lived, he toured the world, he met thousands or hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. This guy had it all sexual positions, everything. The guy did it all. He lived in his 41 years more than my parents could live in 40,000 lifetimes, more than this woman could ever. And I'm sure he'd have a lot of wisdom if he were alive today. I am frequently disappointed by the absence of wisdom. And there are other people who are wise beyond their years. There are some young people I follow on Twitter or other platforms who are super smart. One guy who comes to mind is comedian Andrew Schultz. That guy has a brilliant marketing mind. He knows exactly what to do and the business acumen to piece it all together. He sees his career decades forward, wise beyond his years. That's rare. And you just don't get it with age. You don't just age into it. And I felt this way with consulting. If you're in consulting, you learn a lot because you're jumping from one problem to another, one company to another. You have to learn it super fast. Now, you don't get super deep, so you don't get to live with the products of your work. Still, it is a whirlwind. So in 2, 3, 4 years, you can get the experience that someone else in a corporation probably would never get, ever, no matter how long they stayed in that corporation. So that's why a lot of companies hire consultants, because they have this ability, and also they were probably selected or self-selected for that in the first place. So it's kind of a yin and yang. But wisdom, find places to get it. Get it around the world. Travel. Have crazy jobs, especially early in your career. You could very easily end up in some crappy suburb at 105 running, and someone asks you, hey, what have you got for me? Any great advice? You're like, keep running. Sorry, Julia. I'm disappointed. Small differences can be more disturbing than big ones. If you wake up in some alien world and everything is different and gravity is different, everyone looks, all weird with the pointy ears or green flesh, or they're crawling or popping out of your chest, obviously creepy, you start to scrutinize everything. It would be much more disturbing if you woke up one day and your wife or your child or your boss suddenly became 10% more hostile, or 10% more aloof and indifferent, or 10% more loving or less loving, or uglier or prettier. And those things are so much more disturbing because you can't quite reconcile them. You know something's off, but it's not obvious to you. And that's why this uncanny valley concept exists. When you have the robots or humanoids that they're trying to build, mostly in Japan, because I think they're trying to do everything to avoid having actual sex with humans, but they are building these things and they look a little bit off, and that throws us off like crazy. I remember my grandmother, she was a clean freak. I was, I don't know, maybe 12 or 13 years old, and she left me alone in her apartment to go to the store or whatever. I knew she was so precise and so meticulous. Just as a little joke, I went around the house and I turned everything maybe 5 to 10 degrees. Her makeup pencils, all the vases, everything was exactly where it was, except just slightly turned. She came home. She was livid. Who made this mess? Look at this place. It's disgusting. What did you do? She yelled at me like crazy. She lived in this uncanny valley. This also applies to products and services. A program that you install on your computer sucks from the beginning. You expect more crappiness. You've already recalibrated your expectations. But when you have something you expect to work and then it fails or it crashes or something off happens, that disappoints you. It's an almost good product. An almost good product can be more disturbing than a bad product. This was also a concept that a lot of retailers use. Every 6 months, they move all their merchandise around. I worked at Radio Shack when I was in high school and college. They would send us all these plans and they'd tell you, oh, the phone stuff goes from this wall to that wall, or the TV stuff goes to that wall. And it wasn't a huge change. It was like these minor changes. Why did they do it? It's 2 reasons. One is they have a department and people want to keep their jobs. But because the changes were so mild, they weren't more than 10 or 20% different, it disoriented customers and it forced them to shop around and go to nooks and crannies of the store that they otherwise wouldn't have gone to, so they can discover new products and maybe pick up an extra item. Radio Shack, they never sold anything except their own brand. The disappointment I used to see, people would come in, they would go like, do you have the Sony receiver? Back when Sony actually mattered. No, we don't have Sony. We have something even better. We have Optimus. And they're like, Optimus? I've never heard of Optimus. What is that? Walk them over to the Optimus wall only to realize, oh, we moved those. It's on the other wall now. Let's go over here. Anyway, it was tough selling, but for the record, I was the top salesperson 3 or 4 years running in dollars per hour. You know, you're speaking to a champion salesperson. What occurred to me the other day is your audience can be your prison. Everyone talks about, oh, we want to have this passionate community, these amazing people who will follow our every move. Well, you know what else they will do? They will be infuriated if you violate whatever their expectations are of you. And this was a lesson from Patreon. Patreon tweeted, "We've heard you loud and clear. We're sorry, we're not rolling out the fees change." Patreon as a business wanted to change their fees, but their entire community is like, oh, no, you can't do that. That happens a lot of businesses, but it also happens to artists. I remember when Metallica changed their sound and went mainstream, and all these old-time fans freaked out. How dare you change while I supported you through those other years when you were this underground cool band and now everyone likes you and your mom's listening to Enter Sandman. There's a power that you bestow on communities that will push back when you violate their expectations. And it a lot of times prevents you from growing as an artist or as a creator. I've heard Martin Scorsese on some podcast interview. He was talking about how Hollywood won't let him do certain things. And I'm like, let him? This guy's got an amazing reputation. He's made so many classic films, but they kind of wanted to keep him in a pigeonhole. Hey, you're good at doing these types of movies. So go get Robert De Niro or dig him up, reanimate him with digital effects and get him to fight people on screen screen so we can get millions of dollars. That's what they want. That pigeonholing happens more often than not. In acting, I remember two guys. One was actually kind of cool about it. Adam West, who played the original goofy Batman with the pow, kapow kind of thing. He never really got other roles except ironic roles because he sounds like Batman. But he had a good attitude about it. He'd show up at those fan events and sign autographs and all that. So, so he was good about it. Herman Munster, the guy who played him, Fred Gwynn, he was miserable. He would complain about it all the time. He's like, everyone sees me as this monster. Meanwhile, he's like 6'8" and looks kind of like Frankenstein. I don't know what kind of leading man he thought he'd be. He was cast for a reason, but who knows? Maybe he could have been the biggest leading man if he wasn't a monster. But that same kind of typecasting happens with audiences all the time. They expect certain things of you. And then there's what you feel inside. And I think a true artist has to do that, but it would be dishonest to believe they can do that as freely as they'd like. I had this thought, I'll tell you the context in a second. When success outpaces mastery, it destroys potential. Here's what I mean by that. When you become successful prematurely, there's a good chance you won't fully develop into what you could have been. The thought occurred to me when I went to see a comedian who is now very famous and became famous very quickly, still very young. I'm going to try to keep this person anonymous, both in terms of gender and age. This person has every ingredient, the talent, the point of view, the drive, the intelligence to be great, but isn't just yet. The challenge is there were a lot of funny lines and good premises, but the delivery was all one note. It was very dark and it was all very shouty. What it made me think of is superhero movies and horror movies. It can't be all stabbings. It can't be all punching Thanos in the face. There have to be moments of levity or romance or something that breaks up the monotony of the darkness or the murder or the superhero action scenes. This person needs to modulate their darkness with a little bit of light and vary their tonality a little bit, develop a little intimacy and create this sort of ebb and flow. You need a little bit of vulnerability in your storytelling. You need something that creates an arc. Not that everything has to be personal. There's plenty of very successful comics that don't get personal, but there were some personal stories that could have benefited from a dramatic arc. Early success makes it so much harder to motivate yourself because, hey, the money's coming in and you still have to hone your craft, especially in comedy or music or anything that requires refinement and constantly getting better. And you have to hone your craft. You have to push through to that next level. Money and fame have consumed many a prodigy. Justin Bieber, when he first started doing his YouTube videos, which I guess is how he got famous, people said, wow, this guy's a prodigy. He's amazing. But then he went out and just started getting tattoos and boning starlets, and maybe his music's still okay. And there's also enough people in his orbit that will write songs, make sure he gets up and does his work. So you can kind of maintain him at a certain level of success without letting his self-destructive tendencies eat him alive. But that doesn't mean he's going to get to experience his full potential. I hope that's not the case with this comedian. And in general, I'm disappointed more artists don't become successful or don't even become artists at age 40 plus. As this person is still in their 30s, you still don't have your voice fully together. You don't have your life fully together. And those things really don't hit until you're 40. You think of Louis C.K. or Bill Burr, comedians who really hit their stride around 40. Even Chappelle. Chappelle put out some great comedy in his 30s, but he also started very young. He started at 16 or 17. I'm finding that now with my writing, my voice is so much clearer because I don't lean on crutches as much. I used to go for the joke every time. Now I'm less afraid to be serious. Part of it is a time-saving thing, but also I feel more confident that I can be interesting without having to be funny. I'm going to do a newsletter, an episode on artistry and what the future of that is and what you might want to do to have your artistic potential realized. I know a lot of people have some sort of latent dream, fantasy, or notion of trying stand-up or music or painting or photography, which is kind of bullshit. Sorry, photographers. If you could take 3,000 of anything and pick one good one, you're not an artist. Sorry. But there's a lot of latent potential out there, but it's also very difficult to get started because it's such an uncertain path. And I'm going to get into that in a future episode. What I've noticed is being an artist is saying fuck your rules while being financed by those who create the rules. All the people who patronize art are the richest people in the world. And it's not just art. It's also who can afford to go to these concerts. Look at Bruce Springsteen. He's charging thousands of dollars to go see him on Broadway. Or the Rolling Stones, the tickets are like $600, $800. These are rich people or certainly well-off people that are patrons of the arts. Same thing with NFTs, same thing with even journalism. Journalism historically has been a rich guy buying a newspaper to secure the type of coverage that he wants, to have a vanity project and to rub elbows at parties or maybe rub some other things depending on the party and depending which Epstein or Maxwell is hosting it. There would be no Banksy without Banks. Banksy is not a rebel. Banksy is a servant of the upper class. You don't sell paintings for 90 million, I think he sold stuff for, without patronage. Patronage is what rules the arts. So artists who are speaking truth, including maybe this one, hopefully not. I'm trying to be as honest as I can be, and I'll tell you when I'm conflicted or holding back, which is almost never. Artists have to delude themselves that they are truly saying fuck you to the world. To survive, they can't truly afford to take it to that level. It's performance art. That's the thing with going into any low probability profession, anything that's a craft. You need rich parents or a rich spouse, or you just can't fathom doing anything else with your life, even if you have to eat out of dumpsters. Art has always been a terrible career choice. It's low probability, it relies on patronage, and the digital era, a lot of people say, oh, look at artists not making any money with Spotify. But the digital era actually does offer some great things. First of all, there's a ton of tools to market yourself, whether it's discovery on YouTube or Spotify to get people to your concerts, or TikTok to do your little dances, whatever can attract people to find you. You can put clips out, which I do with the podcast. There's also fewer gatekeepers. So all these people who may be douchebags or on the take or high on drugs or just don't like you, you're not beholden to them. You can bypass them. You can go directly to the people. But that also means there's a ton of fragmentation. Everyone is an artist. Everyone's trying to bombard you. Every person is now the gatekeeper of their own personal gate. They need to decide which artist to consume. That's actually created more work for us, but it is creating a nice large working class of artists. There's so many podcasters or comedians or musicians. They're never going to be huge. They're never going to be household names, but they'll play small theaters. They'll play small clubs. They'll tour around the country. People will hopefully sign up for their Patreons. And that's great because they will make a living in a way that you couldn't before, because before it was one big radio station plays a hit and one superstar. The era of the superstar is waning. It's more about that middle class of artists that's been made possible. And the reality is the probabilities have not changed. It's still probably less than 1% that are going to make it. 1%, 2%, I don't know, but very, very low. Someone else posted on this subject, a master's degree in data journalism from Columbia, which is a 12-month program. This is the top journalism school out there, costs An unbelievable $159,206. The $6 is infuriating. It reminds me of almost flunking out of an advanced math course. The professor ended up giving me a D plus. The plus is the biggest kick in the balls. These schools, they should be tried as criminal enterprises. There are two questions Ivy League schools must ask prospective arts or media students. Number one, do your parents own a yacht? And number two, do you like the taste of top ramen? And if they answer no to both questions, the school has to have a giant catapult that just shoots them directly to a nearby technical school. I'm going to do a whole new episode on education. I did one episode on the future of education. We're due for another one. I've completely rethought what we should be doing in education. I'm going to maybe do that next year. Let's keep going. Principles negate regret. If you know who you are, what you value, what's important to you, you're not going to regret doing things that go against those values. You're not going to feel bad about a job you didn't really want, even if it pays you double what your current job has, assuming your current one is not too bad. Investments you didn't believe in, like I have a little bit of FOMO about digital currencies. I didn't get in very early. I don't really believe in them. I think a lot of it is pretty grifty. And even if it isn't, it's almost impossible to know which ones are going to make it because it's so early in the game. And also there's a lot of regulations coming. So I just don't feel that bad, even though there are people in my life who are very angry at me because I wrote about these things in 2011 and I could have been a trillionaire if I just put $1,000 in. There's a little bit of FOMO, but not as bad as that guy who bought a pizza with, I think he used like 20,000 Bitcoin. He would be a multi-billionaire now. That guy must be getting punched in the face daily by his wife. Anyway, parties you didn't go to or sex you didn't have with people you don't like or respect. Some party with cool people. And sure, you can write tax the rich on the back of your dress and attend anyway. But if you truly don't respect those people, you probably shouldn't be at that party. And if you are, chances are you want to be there. And also achievements you didn't value enough to work for. I don't know how many people have told me, oh, I want to travel. And then you talk to them and they're in their 30s and then 40s and they still haven't. At that point, it's not a money thing. I've seen people backpack through all these European countries in South America and Australia who had nothing, no money at all, and they found a way. They would work in some of these places. They would ride trains super cheap. They would do all this stuff just to achieve this dream. You probably don't want it that badly if you're not going to put in that same kind of effort. That applies to all kinds of achievements. There are people who talk about writing the book that they've always wanted to write or starting a new career. That's all great, but unless you do it, it doesn't matter. I'm doing it here. It's possible if you plan right. But if you don't, you probably shouldn't regret it. And the more honest you are about your principles, you shouldn't have those regrets, even if those things end up being successful for other people. This was something I found in corporate. You start competing for things you don't want. You look at peers who are getting promoted, or you look at job openings and you start competing and politicking, and you're like, I don't even want this. But because you're in that environment, it forces you to compete for it. You feel like you're not progressing if you don't. If you don't believe in it, know it. Go to the thing you do believe in. That's why I say principles negate regret. But principles don't excuse you from not trying. Oh, I'm so principled that I'm poor, I'm protesting all day, I'm throwing this brick through the Target window. That's not it either. That's not a solution. Principles should have actions and something constructive tied to them as well. You have to be building things, not just tearing them down or saying, oh, I'm okay that I haven't pursued this or that. My greatest fear is a productive idiot. Someone who is completely stupid, and yet gets so much done. I guess it's how I feel about government most of the time. They're like, oh, we got to pass legislation. We haven't passed any legislation this month. I'm like, slow it down, slow it down. You're not that bright, and I don't want you passing a lot of stuff because you're going to screw things up. And certainly not bright enough to analyze the consequences of all the lobbied bills that you're just signing your name to and never read because they're 20,000 pages long. That is a legitimate fear of mine, a productive idiot. The greatest waste is a lethargic genius. So someone who doesn't have that drive to be productive, but actually has the ability. So there's a lot of waste and a lot of unfortunate productivity, and we need both to stop. This thought occurred to me when everyone was debating masks and Fauci went out there and lied because I guess he wanted to preserve masks for healthcare workers. I have stopped trusting US science. I'll take it into account, but I'm going to scrutinize it much more. I'm looking to Europe and Israel and all these other countries because here everything is partisan. Masks, medical stuff is partisan. It's not one side or the other. It's everybody. And brains have been broken, and now people are arguing for things that they don't even understand just because their side supports it. We have to bake into how we live, both individually and culturally, and in terms of policy, learning from other countries. People have solved a lot of problems. Look at the Nordics. They figured out how to solve drug and opioid addiction. One of the things they do, and there's a guy who wrote a book about this recently, this guy Mike Schellenberger, he talked about on, I think it was Joe Rogan's podcast, there it's not just housing for the homeless, because it's not a housing problem. Most of the people on the streets are mentally ill or have drug addiction. Think of it logically. You know, if a regular person gets fired and can't afford to pay the rent, they're going to go to the government for assistance, or they'll hang out in that apartment until they get kicked out and a legal procedure kicks in, or they'll move to stay with a friend or a relative or a parent. There are so many branches you have to hit before landing on the cold, hard ground. And the fact that so many have is an indicator not that they don't know how to call a friend or that they just happen to lose their house and can't afford it. That is simplistic and honestly idiotic. There's actual stats that the Seattle Homeless Organization said something like 76% or 80% have drug addiction. The solution the Nordics have is they made their assistance conditional. So it's not like, hey, we'll get you a house, then we'll try to fix you up. You have to do these 4 things or you will not have housing, or you will lose your housing. So they have created a very effective incentive system, and incentives work. I mean, yeah, there will be some people who are too far gone and maybe you need a more drastic intervention, but for most people, that does work. Brazil did a very similar program for parents because they have a lot of kids in poverty in the favelas, other places. So what they did was, if you make sure that your child is in school, that they get the vaccinations, that you do certain things, then you will get government assistance. It was conditional. I'm not a big fan of keeping people on the dole like that. I don't think we want people dependent on government long term. There's too much temptation to pull strings. Just look at what is happening with COVID. Can you imagine if we had a universal basic income and the government just said everyone has to be vaccinated, including your 12-year-olds, and if they're not, then you're not going to get your UBI. You don't want to give central authority that much power over you. I think it's okay to help people and to get them out of a bind, but much of this has to be done locally. Anyway, there's so much depth of knowledge about all these issues in all these other countries. How dare we think that we have all the answers, or that Fauci or some other middling, incompetent bureaucrat has to come up with all the answers? Why not sit in a room with some really smart people in other countries and actually come up with policy that works because it's been proven? A friend of mine keeps asking me technology questions. I'm like, Google it. You're not the first person to experience this problem. Yeah, there are some issues that are harder or that are unique to us, but at the very least, we need to be absorbing and learning. And some things won't be able to be adapted because culturally we're so different. The way Asia is with masks and with following rules will never be that way. Americans are not rule followers. We'd rather die than put on a mask. That's the way America wants it. I just can't imagine a country in more desperate need of learning from others. That's why I think individually, we need to prioritize international travel and going to hostels when you're young, learning how people live, seeing how they live, especially the poor countries. It'll give you such an appreciation. I remember when I went to Venezuela, this is before Chavez, you go to the resort area and everything's fine. You go into the city, it is wild. People were poor as poor can get. I stood out because I was tall. I was head and shoulders above everybody, and they just saw this target walking by, someone to rob. It was really unnerving, really scary, and worth its weight in gold, because that's how much was robbed from me. A lot of gold. No kidding. It's important because all these people who constantly catastrophize America, it's like, oh my God, it's the most racist country. I'm like, you have not seen what goes on. In some European countries, they throw batteries at black players on the field in soccer. I'm sure it's happened here, but they're just insane. People need to contextualize what goes on here relative to the world. And I was really encouraged by this tweet by the incoming mayor of New York, Eric Adams. He said, many of the answers to the issues we face can be found abroad, whether it's in Europe, Asia, Africa, or South America. As mayor, we're going to find the cities doing things best and learn from them, no matter where in the world they are. Music to my ears. That is great. I hope he follows through on it. I hope he actually does it. But every single politician, every single bureaucrat, everyone should be doing it, and not just taking it verbatim, but adapting it to our culture, our situation, our programs, our budgets, and all this other stuff. It turns out that liberals are more conservative than conservatives. There's a study that was done on California. In Southern California, 3 neighborhoods with single parenthood rates of essentially 0% can be found in the heart of Hollywood. Take a trip through Whitley Heights Historic District below the Hollywood sign. Nested among the lavish former residences Frances Bushman and Judy Garland, you'll find residents who voted for Clinton by a rate of 86% in 2016. You'll also find no single parents in this Hollywood Hills neighborhood. Now, that's an anecdotal piece, but then there's actual data from a study. The Institute for Family Studies did a report on California. And this is what they said. Despite being a global force for cultural liberalism, actually has a higher share of stable married families than the nation as a whole. About 67% of California parents are in intact marriages compared to 63% of American parents. So they're higher than the national average. Likewise, 65% of children ages 0 to 17 in California reside with their married biological parents compared to 62% of children in the United States. In other words, family life in the Golden State is more stable than in the country as a whole. So if you just ignored how people on the left speak and the issues they promote, they're like, oh, single parents, that's great. Drugs, yeah, use drugs. It's okay. We understand. Genders, yeah, switch genders, live whatever life you want. They say all these things, and some of them are fine, some of them are not. But if you look at how they actually live, turns out they live more conservative lives than actual conservatives. Look at what people do and not what they say. What would you want for your kids? A lot of the spouting that goes on sounds almost insane to a pragmatist. Do whatever, remove your genitals at age 14, whatever. I have all the love in the world for trans people, but 14? No, you gotta wait till your brain, your frontal lobe develops, and then maybe you change your mind or you do whatever you need to do. But the rhetoric and the lifestyle don't match. Everyone knows that eliminating standards, for example, is horrible for your kids. What do you hold their performance up against? How do you make sure that they can compete in the real world? Any good parent will make sure that's done. But then you look at what they're doing in the schools. They're like, oh, let's take away testing. Let's lower the bar for certain groups. They love to throw around the word empowerment, but there's nothing more disempowering than telling you that you got in, not because you're better or equal to these other kids, but because we, the good, lovely people, lowered the bar for you. Here you are. Here's your spot. We saved one for you. And it's only one because we looked at the data and we know that statistically, that's how many your group should represent. But what if you should fill the room because you're great? You should be aspiring to do that. But if you take away people's ability to stand out and all the measures of standing out, like grades and SAT scores, then you have no mechanism by which to take all the other chairs in the room. And none of these people would put up with any of that for their own kids. They want all the chairs in the room. And guess what? They'll save one for you with your lower expectations and their tokenism. Good luck. God, I'm so angry. The thing that's taking off now as a philosophy is Stoicism. There's this guy, Ryan Holiday, who's written a book on it, and he's kind of repopularized this thing that was started by Marcus Aurelius, who was a thinker, a leader, a fighter, all the things that women say they love on their dating profiles, and then they end up with some dork who just earns a lot of money. I think Stoicism is great. I believe in a lot of Stoic principles. A lot of it has to do with delayed gratification and working for your goals and things like that. But what if you die halfway to your goals? You miss out on all the bongs, the bigamy, the bagels, all the things you've denied yourself are now gone because now you're holding out for this amazing future. Well, what if the amazing future never comes? Stoicism only works for people who don't get hit by cars. Maybe there's an element of discipline and there's some satisfaction along the way, but at some point, you might have to have an edible just to ease up, hit the brakes a little bit on that delayed gratification and grit. A conservative guy, Dennis Prager, posted, "Without God, America cannot prosper. Do you agree?" I don't exactly agree. I think without unifying values, America cannot prosper. And until now, religion has been that vessel for conveying those unifying values. It's still very buggy, and it's gotten even more buggy over time as a conduit for values because we're not taking well to those old stories. We need something else, and I've talked about this sort of a discovery that we're having of all these things that aren't really faiths, but none of those substitutes do thus far. I'm going to get into that more in an upcoming episode on trust. I don't know if this will help you, but I was with some friends at a dinner party, and one friend was telling me how his son is acting out in religious school. He's just not buying any of the stories, very similar to the way I was when I went to yeshiva. And I gave him my thoughts, and he found this helpful, so maybe you will too. I think his son is like 12 or 13. And what I would tell my son is ignore the magical characteristics. Focus on the lessons that those stories are trying to teach. They're just a vessel for teaching values. We relate to stories. It's just the way we learn. I was pretty atheist. I wouldn't say I'd get into arguments with people because I didn't really care enough, but I'm slipping into agnosticism in the sense that I don't want to spend time on it. I don't want to argue with people. And I also respect that we don't have anything better right now to teach values to kids. I hope we will someday, but we don't right now. When I look at religious people, I have a certain fondness there because it keeps their families together. It keeps certain traditions. And on the whole, I think it makes them better, more charitable people and better contributors to society. Certainly taking care of their own and their extended families. So now social networks are deciding what is information, disinformation, or misinformation. Only they can decide which is the real religion, which is the true God. It's not possible all of these religions are correct. They all have conflicting stories and all these disciples, all these teachings cannot reconcile. And then all the people from the religions that are incorrect should be deplatformed, and they need to start their own network called Prayler. Sort of like Parler, but for prayer. And they can just spout disinformation to each other. If Muslims win, then that is the correct religion. If the Christians win, we'll finally be able to sketch Muhammad. South Park tried. I think they executed that writer. No, they did end up blacking it out and probably saved some lives. Oh, man. So I started thinking about all the time that I want back and can't have because that's just not how time works. The time I wasted playing video games. I was a consultant and we had first gotten laptops connected through the network. And we installed, I forget what it was, Doom or one of these multiplayer games. And we were just murdering each other online while we weren't chargeable on projects. If I had just read a book or done something else useful with that time, I would be so much smarter right now. I'd be so much better off. I would have way better equipment to record this podcast. Everything would be better. Video games, a horrible, horrible use of time. Unless you're so good, you can make money at it. But even then, there's better ways to make money where you're actually outdoors and you see the sun and you get some vitamin D. Formatting documents, the time spent nudging little boxes around on a screen, you will never, ever get that back. If you work in a corporate setting, find a way to stop the madness. I was in charge of all of these innovation projects within a big financial services company I worked for, and went into a meeting that had some executives in it. They asked me, when is the PowerPoint due for the presentation? They were trying to get a product funded. And I said, never. There will be no presentation. We're going to do a 2-page pre-read in Word. I put a template together. The look I got from this woman executive, it was like, that's your ass. She already saw me getting fired because it's such a PowerPoint culture. Everything is on PowerPoint. People don't even talk unless there's slides involved. I took a stand and said, there will be no slides. You will be prepared to discuss whatever needs to be discussed and get the approvals based on the merits of your idea. If she could have executed me on the spot and slit my throat, she would have. Fast forward to the actual meeting. It goes so well that the CMO at the urinal, he shows up and he has this big booming voice. He's like, this is the best meeting I've ever been to. And I got an applause break. It wasn't a standing ovation. I don't want to exaggerate. But the entire executive team applauded me for this meeting because there was no PowerPoint, because we actually had real conversations. Do it. Fight the system. That is time you will never, ever get back. Time spent researching restaurants. Your meal does not matter. No one cares if the foie gras is imported from France or something like France, but significantly worse, like French Canada. Nobody cares. Ultimately, what you realize when you get older is you really are there for the experience. You're there for the people. It's not really about the meal. When you're young, you just have this surplus of time to do these stupid things like go on Yelp. Who is a Yelper? I lived in a foodie city, have many foodie friends. Not one has admitted to being an avid Yelper. Who are these people and why are we trusting them with our precious decisions of where to eat? Anyway, you live to eat again, even if you go wrong. Overthinking dates or prospective dates. The stereotype is women do this a lot, which they do, but men do this too, especially now with digital. It's like, what did he mean? Like 400 texts. Meanwhile, guys were so simple. We meant exactly what we said, or we forgot, or something very vanilla. It's almost like they're interpreting the Bible. What did the Mashiach mean? Going through the scrolls. He texted this at 8:42, but the previous text was at 7:45. It kind of reminds me of my dog who is constantly sniffing out evidence, but he doesn't know what the crime is. Aha, this is the bush that has the answer. Answer to what? He's like, well, I don't know. There are no answers. There is no need to analyze. Go with the flow. Take guys literally, and guys, you're on your own. Women are complicated. Covering up pimples. I had such a problem at some point when I was a kid. I would be late for school because I figured out I could use the tinted oxy thing. I was trying to get it just right. I would miss buses. I'd be late for things. What am I doing? You think people are so involved with your stuff. And yeah, there'd always be a friend who would pick on you, especially now with social media. They'll probably immortalize it in TikTok. They'll dance around your pimple with some Rihanna song or whatever. But It doesn't matter. Everyone is so busy with their own lives, with their own issues, with their own insecurities. They really don't care about your pimples. And if they do, there's something so insanely wrong with them. You should not take their criticism seriously. Moving is the most insane waste of time. Packing stuff up and then unpacking it. Same stuff. If you could pay someone to do that, it's so worth it. It's time you'll never get back. Unless you're one of these people, they're so anal, like my grandmother, where trusting anyone else to do it would just drive her insane. We're also entering NFT world where we're not even interested in the real world. We're not interested in physical objects. I remember when I was a kid, if I broke a plate or something, my mom would yell at me. Now I could be Zorba the Greek and tossing him against the wall and stomping on all the China in the world because there's China. You can destroy China because of China. Everything is so cheap. You could just replace it tomorrow for $12.99. You get a whole new set from Target. Fixing gadgets, data, and apps. I still waste so much time on this stuff. They say, oh, look at how much computers have made us more productive. No, they haven't. They just created a bunch of stupid busy work where we sit around trying to figure out, where's that file? Oh my God, did this back up? Or where's my password? I have to call IT. Sign up for my Patreon because I'm about to change your life. I'm going to save you so much time. Eliminate gadgets. Every extra gadget is like a baby. It needs to be fed by charging it. It needs to be backed up. It needs to be updated. It needs to be dressed up in a little protective pouch. It needs accessories, little keyboards and little whatever. Get rid of your iPads, get rid of your tablets, get rid of extra computers, get rid of everything. If you can live just off your phone and you can dock it, I don't know if Apple has this, but I use a Samsung phone. They have something called DeX, D-E-X, where you can plug it into this tiny dock that you could buy for $30, and it gives you a full desktop experience. You can have your keyboard, mouse, a screen, or multiple screens. If you're doing just basic document editing and even some video editing, no need for extra device. My dad, he has so many tablets, Moses would be jealous. All customer service interactions, all these cable companies. There was one time I was on the phone for no joke on a Saturday for 4.5 hours. I was so furious that I think they were hanging up on me because I was cursing so much. By the way, don't curse on the phone with them because that gives them license to hang up on you. And that's another opportunity to simplify. To the extent that you can limit the number of relationships or the types of relationships. I started going with prepaid plans instead of postpaid plans because the postpaid plans got to a point where I didn't even understand the bills. They were so confusing. I would rather just pay for the year up front, pay cash for the phone, and I'm done with it. Comparison shopping. Yeah, you can save an extra $50, but if you value your time and you earn a pretty decent living, the effort required to save an extra $20 is going to be way more expensive than just paying the premium. So just pay the premium. If you just bought things when you need them and not when they're on sale or because you're tempted or because you've been shopping around for months, you will be so much better off. Now I understand if money's tight, maybe you do that trade-off, but don't underestimate how much your time is worth and what else you could be doing to advance your life instead of sitting around shopping. And there are some shortcuts. You can go, so Slick Deals is a perfect place to go. If there's anything I kind of need or want, but don't really care if I get it this month or 5 months from now, it'll send you a reminder whenever it goes on sale. I don't think this will work on avid shoppers. It will not work on anyone I've had a relationship with. And commuting. Now with remote work, people are realizing, oh wait, I can actually have a life and not have to commute. The shorter you can get your commute times, the happier you'll be. There are perks to commuting, except driving. People think that they're empowered because they get into a car, but traffic is completely out of your control. If you're in a car, I guess you could listen to podcasts or audiobooks, but it is the illusion of control. So you're better off taking public transport because you could at least be productive. I wrote an entire screenplay because I had an hour and 20-minute commute when I was working at MasterCard. It's very easy to use that time productively. On the same topic, this guy, Joe Portsmouth, he said, Warren Buffett is worth billions of dollars, and yet no young person would switch lives with him if they had to be in their 90s. Being a time billionaire, having billions of minutes or seconds left to live, is so much more valuable than being a money billionaire. Warren Buffett, I'm pretty sure, would give up every single penny to be young again. And you know what? Because of his work ethic and because of his ability, he would probably rebuild, if not the same amount of wealth. He would certainly be extremely successful. And I think any successful person has that confidence. Just goes to show you how truly valuable time is and how we're never, ever getting any of these things back. So look for opportunities to cut things out that don't really need attention. That's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, share it with others, subscribe on your favorite podcast player, and please review on iTunes. It really helps with visibility. Subscribe on YouTube, and hopefully you can join the Patreon, where I'm going to have a ton of exclusives over the next couple of weeks. So I'll be putting those up shortly, and I've got some special episodes, the bigger episodes coming up as well, that are theme-driven. I'm going to continue my Future of Relationships series. That's it for now. I'm Steve Faktor. See you next week on the McFuture. The value of an insult cannot exceed the virtue of its issuer. There's a lot of low-value people insulting people who are probably famous and more successful than they are. And I forgot who said this. Never take criticism from anyone you would not seek advice from. Anything short of being canceled for something egregious, who cares what people say? Who cares? It's worthless. It won't matter. If they're so consumed with your life, their life is shit. Have nothing but pity for them and move on. Nothing sadder than a poor elitist. I see so many people that are so snooty on social media, especially media types, and I know where they live and I know how old they are. They're getting paid not even 30 grand at some of these companies like Business Insider. And they have such attitude. They have such certainty. They have such an ability to know what is right and what is wrong. And they're not even 30. It's the same kind of thing as when I talked about Greta and her lecturing us. There's a certain righteousness and certainty that the youth have now that maybe they didn't have back then. Maybe before it would be recreational, where they would just jump into a lake without checking to see if the water's deep enough and they'd break a leg or something. But now it's literally telling you how to solve world problems. Look, you don't have to be successful to have an opinion. You certainly don't have to be rich, but you have to be somewhat worldly and somewhat humble. Even though I have a lot of strong opinions and I've lived life and have some experience and hopefully some insight that people value, you cannot have that kind of certainty. You need strong opinions loosely held. I have strong opinions. They're based on the best information I have right now, but I can change it tomorrow. More information comes in and I try to adapt. I don't see a lot of people adapting because they're digging into these dogmas. And in an upcoming episode, I'm going to go deep into how to fish people out of their dogmas. I was walking around the city the other day and I saw a cop on the phone. Shouldn't this person be looking around and trying to see what's going on? And, are there any predators or tourists being beaten or stabbed? But no, on the phone, because look, they got important messages. They got news feeds to read. They got podcasts to subscribe to. Hopefully this one. We have created a society of amputees, not only in terms of attention, but one hand is always holding a phone. Whether you're cooking or driving or policing or socializing or riding your bike. I saw delivery guys, same thing, phone in one hand, reading it as he rides. We have created a one-armed society. On top of that, our attention is completely fragmented. Have you ever tried talking to a person who's on their phone? They're like, oh yeah, I'm listening. They'll regurgitate the last 3 words of what you said, but they didn't actually hear it or process it or have any capacity to respond. But I'm taking this as a positive. We've proven that our society can still survive on a fraction of the attention we used to give to things. Either we're so brilliant or everything has been so idiot-proofed for us that we can afford to be these mutant monkeys staring at screens all day. I don't know how many field workers today can be holding a phone while swinging a hoe. Not that kind of hoe. Anyway, that's the society we've wrought, and I, for one, am grateful because now we don't have to be in the fields and we can play with our phones. Isn't it more fulfilling? I think so. This is quite lovely. I jokingly tweeted, immediately marry or divorce a person who uses pedagogical in a casual conversation. I saw someone use that in some casual tweet. Whoever he is with is either deeply in love with this type of language or is packing their bags, but there's really nothing in the middle. And the reason it will never be implemented on me is because I just totally mispronounced it. I think it's pronounced pedagogical. I feel like my relationships are safe. If you look at a restaurant, you could look at a couple things. One is how small is their menu? The smaller the menu, typically the better the restaurant. If it all fits on a single sheet with large print, you're good to go. If it's multiple pages, you are going to spend a lot of time on the bowl the next day. The other thing is, did they pick an Asian? There's this spate, especially in the suburbs, of Asian restaurants. What the hell is an Asian restaurant? Tell me which Asian am I going for? Is it Malaysian? Is it Chinese? Is it Indian? Is it Thai? Is it Korean? Which Asian? And if you're trying to be all Asians to all people, you're going to have horrible food. It's very hard. I've never gone to a Chinese restaurant that makes a good pad thai, and neither will you. So if you see a pad thai on a Chinese menu, run. Just run as far as you can. You know, since I moved to the burbs, which is going to be another episode, you try your best to squeeze some sort of culture out of the suburbs, and it just will not be had because you can't make good Middle Eastern food out of something that just doesn't exist locally. Sometimes I'm in the mood for some delicious ethnic cuisine, but if it doesn't exist, you're just better off eating whatever is the local cuisine. And if it's chain cuisine, learn to cook or set your expectations accordingly. Sit there, eat your gruel, and stare at all the other people who are just suffering through it. Ignore the magical characteristics, splitting of the sea with Moses, Cain and Abel, the snake, sacrificing your son. If he just sacrificed the snake, he would have had a great barbecue. I tried to come up with alternate names for English departments. Burning Rich Dad's Money Department, Less Relevant Than TikTok Department, Can Never Afford an Apartment Department, Clinging to Irrelevance Department, Department of Fleecing Department, Researching Vegan Cannibalism Department.